Brandon Brice, the people's champ. Real news, real people, and straight to the point. I've got an amazing show today because we're going to get into the conversation on wearing masks. As you can see, I am not wearing a mask. I don't believe in giving it up to the machine that tells you if you don't wear a mask. But guess what, folks? The CDC thinks otherwise. The CDC, no longer constrained by the president, says that wearing a mask is now the law, a federal crime. That means you can go to jail, folks. Joining me in studio, we've got the honest governance advocate with me. We've got David Palmer, and we've got the honest libertarian, my friend, my good friend, the people's champ of Detroit, Council Commissioner Scotty Bowman. So, Scotty, I'm going to start off with you. You're a libertarian guy. You're the guy that fights for freedom. Let me ask you this. When we talk about this phenomenon that says you can go to jail if you don't wear a mask, is that constitutional? Your thoughts?
No. And it's because it's a matter of personal choice when you're in what you wear and who you interact with. And as far as the Michigan Constitution goes, there's freedom. I guess it doesn't specify freedom of dress, but it would really fall under a Ninth Amendment right. In other words, the rights not enumerated here are, it doesn't mean that we don't have those rights also. It means that, I'd say constitutionally, the federal government doesn't have anything granting them the authority to tell people what to wear. And the state government doesn't have anything in its law granting it the authority to tell people what to wear. So I think that's really where the constitutional part would come from.
So, David, let me ask you this. I mean, right now we're talking about, there's the thing of where's the balance in overreach of government and keeping us safe?
So that's a pretty good question. I mean, obviously, I have a mask on right now. If one of you two are
the machine, folks, he's part of the machine. No, go ahead.
If one of you two are carrying this and not exhibiting symptoms, I happen to have some conditions that would make me likely to die, literally die. I have multiple sclerosis and type 2 diabetes.
That's a disclaimer for WJZZ.
So if there's an issue here, I'd rather have a mask on and be safe. And quite frankly, the contrarian culture that has been encouraged by POTUS 45 and a lot of the political divisions that we have, if that had been set aside in March, April, and May of 2020, we might not be where we're at today. Because the countries that have successfully managed their COVID challenges, in large part, was due to an authoritarian response, which is, I think, entirely inappropriate in the United States, but you look what happened in China, and they actually locked down good parts of the country for months and months. So there's a lot of range of responses here, but ultimately, if you're going to potentially die from COVID, I think it's entirely reasonable to be sitting here and wearing a mask in a room with two otherwise intelligent gentlemen.
David, here's the challenge that I have, and I want to hear from you. Let's put up those call numbers, folks, because the challenge that I have is that I should want to be safe, not have to be safe. I shouldn't be told what to do like I'm a child. 313-355-6018. This is the Brice is Right. We're talking to Scotty Bowman and David Palmer. David, I mean, right now when we look at what's going on, where the CDC is essentially saying with President Biden, if you don't wear a mask, you're doing time. You're going to jail. I mean, this is beyond authoritarian. I mean, you're talking the fact that, what gives government, a.k.a. Mr. Biden, Mr. President, what gives him the right to say, basically, if you don't wear a piece of cloth, you're headed to, 15 to get to 20?
Well, I think you've got a little bit of hyperbole mixed in with that. So the challenge is, when you go to an airport, do you expect to go through security screening that was essentially a profiteering run after 9/11 to force every American to go through these airports in security that is proven again and again not to work? We've all conceded that in order to get on an airplane, we're willing to go through a background check. Some of us have TSA pre-check and all this nonsense. So the executive order that I believe Biden put in place is for public transportation, interstate commerce, and federal property. He has the full purview of the executive office to do as he sees fit, within statute to order safety precautions be done on federal property and pertaining to interstate commerce. So I don't know that Mr. Biden could necessarily require, or President Biden could require that we wear masks to be able to go to a restaurant in Detroit, Michigan. But it's within his purview under existing, law and statute that this is something that he can do. And like I said, had we been more responsible as a nation earlier in this process and not pretended that it was a hoax and that it just magically go away, and that this wasn't a highly virulent form of COVID that would potentially kill an awful lot of people. Over 400,000 Americans are attributed to have died from this as the cause of their death.
So hold on. So this is interesting, folks, because you just brought up a great point. Executive orders. Scotty, I want to come to you. Right now, the president has on record 40, and I'll name them shortly, 40 executive orders. Out the gate, folks, we're not even in March. And the president came out swinging with executive order after executive order. Some say that's what dictators do. Scott, I want to ask you this right now. When you hear the conversation and you see these many executive orders, does that concern you?
Yes, it does, but I did want to interject quickly that I just put on a mask, not because it's the law. In fact, I wore seatbelts here, and I hate the seatbelt law. But sometimes it's a good idea. And if the person here is at risk by me not wearing it, I feel that it is a decent thing to do for me to put it on. So I made that choice. Again, I don't agree with it being a mandate. Executive orders are way overused. Pretty much every administration that we've had in my lifetime, and I mean this both at the state with the governor and with the federal level, has gone crazy with executive orders. They try to treat it as legislation, and part of it is because there's so many agencies that fall in the executive branch, so therefore they can use these agencies to execute action, executive action, whether or not there's a law that they're really enforcing.
And the executive order process is really the failure of Congress to legislate appropriately. So, I mean, if you look back at the recent history over the last, say, 3 decades of executive orders, and, really called out by the DACA challenge that President Obama had tried to tackle, is that Congress has, refused to take action on significant priorities, immigration reform, and the president, POTUS 45, attempted to do things that just didn't reconcile with decency in a lot of ways. Banning transgender people from serving in the military. It's like, really, you're going to go look for a fraction of a percent of humans who want to serve this country and tell them they can't be there because of a biological anomaly that they have and that they're living with?
So what do you? So let me ask you this. So what do you say for those individuals who believe that? So some on the right have said, and some not necessarily on the right, have said that it's a distraction, that when you're serving in the military, you are supposed to be focused on combat, not your significant other. That has been what people have said. I say, this is me personally, if anybody wants to serve, let them serve.
Yeah. Grow the bleep up. Just get over it and live life and know that your brothers and sisters standing next to you are there because they choose to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Doesn't that technically go back to, the don't ask, don't tell, which is literally, hey, I mean, it's your business is your business.
Are you a human? Are you physically and mentally qualified for this position? End of story, full stop.
All right. Scott, let me ask you this. I'm going to segue a little bit. The president is now getting urged. Now, normally, folks, I don't agree with what comes out of the left. But today I did. They said, Congress is saying, Mr. President, $10,000 doesn't work. Move it up to $50,000. Now, here's my thought on this. College debt needs to be taken care of and responsibly held by the people that took the debt out. But the reality is you can't go to college for less than $50,000 anyway. Scotty, I want to ask you this. You are a instructor, professor. I mean, the fact that even Biden proposed $10,000, I mean, is that even realistic?
Well, the problem with the whole issue of student loans over the years and financial aid, and of course I received it, so it's not like I'm trying to be judgy about it. But as a practical matter, what's happened is it can't keep up with the rate at which colleges raise their prices. that no matter how much aid they give students, colleges will always make sure to raise their prices a little bit more. And I believe that really that the high cost of tuition is driven by the fact that people can afford to go who otherwise would not be able to afford to go because of all this assistance they receive. So as far as the debt, I think there should be some kind of forbearance or something where people don't have to pay the loans right now because, in part because of the government's own actions, they're unable to earn any money. And so I don't see any reason in penalizing them because they can't pay a debt that, and for that matter, I feel that way about all the taxes too. I mean, the government's created a situation where a lot of people simply can't earn the money to pay the expenses that are put in front of them.
So, Scotty, you just brought up a good point. David, I want to come back to you on this. Should everybody go to college? Because I can tell you there were many people I knew that went to college and didn't have a plan. And in some cases didn't want to have a plan. I mean, should we mandate it that you shouldn't be able to go to college unless you got a plan? Or should we allow people that luxury to decide what they want to do when they go get educated? Your thoughts?
So I was lucky to work at the Workforce Intelligence Network for Southeastern Michigan for a number of years, and we were the think tank that studies Detroit's labor market and the talent inputs and outputs. So supply, demand, 101. So what is the talent, what is the currency of the 21st century? Talent. How do you get into a position where you're talented enough to have the credentials that are needed to earn a place making a living wage in the workforce? You have to go get a post-secondary certificate. Post-secondary certificate could be a trade school, it could be a community college, or it could be the university stuff, which all three of us at this table, I believe, have at least baccalaureate degrees, if not master's degrees, right? So how do you get that if you're a normal human who doesn't make, 4 times what it cost to go to college in the 1970s when people got to go to work and pay for college as they went? So in the state of Michigan, we've decreased funding for public institutions precipitously over the last 3 decades and currently sit number 44 in the United States for the percentage of budget spent in Michigan on supporting public institutions. We have no meaningful controls on the cost side, which Mr. Bowman just talked about, as far as how universities are regulated and how they choose to spend. So when you're looking at Tier 1 research institutions like Wayne State University, University of Michigan, and Michigan State, you have payrolls that are concurrent with competing with other T1 institutions nationally. So the whole situation is really challenging. So I'd recommend, if somebody wants to understand the credentials that are needed and why it's so important that you get a post-secondary credential, you can look at the report from Michigan Future, A Path to Good Paying Careers for All.
But here's the challenge, though. I think the issue that folks are having is they're saying, the reality, the average student loan debt is about $50,000. And so it was amazing that Congress stood up and said that, but the president said, well, we'll give you 10 grand. And to me, Scotty, I'll come to you. Simply put, are colleges too expensive for the average American? Yes or no?
Oh, heck yeah.
It's big business.
And they weren't always that way. I'm going to bring this up. My father, you're asking how people pay. I'll tell you how my father paid for it. He worked at now they call it DQ. It used to be called Dairy Queen. For a number of years.
DQ
I'm sorry.
I
don't know if I can name. I should have said maybe a fast food place that served ice cream or frozen custard. Anyway, he did that, and he worked at the college cafeteria, and he saved up money, and that's how he paid for his college tuition. He became an attorney. Now, that is what people used to be able to do. Why were they able to do that? Well, they're able to do that because of the economy of scale. What has happened is the colleges now realize they can keep getting more money, and so they keep raising their prices, and so no one can afford college, and so again the government has to kick in more money, and so it becomes a cycle. One way I kind of see a way of kind of backing up out of that cycle is, and you mentioned controlling costs. I don't believe in price controls as far as a mandate, but you could make it a condition upon, we'll pay for your college if you go to a school that has these practices. And you might go, well, that's kind of putting it on the student. Well, actually, it's putting it on the college because the college isn't going to be able to get any of that money that, is part of these grants or these loans from these students unless they get their act together. So that would help drive it without it being a mandate or something forced on the institutions themselves.
Hold that thought. Hold on. We're going to come back with David Palmer. Folks, we're going to take a quick station break. This is the Brandon Brice Show. We're coming back. Real news, real people, straight to the point. Take us out. Cameron.
Is that always your...
All right, folks, we are back. That was Mr. Cameron. I'm going to come back to David Palmer. David, let me ask you this. We were talking about, before the break, we were talking about college being too expensive, but I want to segue into another one of Joe Biden's executive orders, and that's the $15 minimum wage. Now, some have said, why in the heck on God's green earth are we paying people $15 an hour to literally move apart from here to here? Some have said it's finally catching up with the times of the economy. Talk to me, David. I mean, you deal with economic development. You're all over the city with it. For the fight for $15 an hour. Do we need a $15 increase in minimum wage? Yes or no? And if not, why?
So the $15 was relevant close to 10 years ago when we started the conversation. If you were to look at keeping on par with cost of living adjustments, you're probably talking close to $21 an hour now. So it really depends on what the function of wages will be and how that fits into the larger economy. So if the median cost of a 2-bedroom apartment for a family of 3 is $743 in the state of Michigan, and affordability would be considered 30% of your net take-home pay would go to pay for housing and utilities and the things that get wrapped into your housing, then you can do the math backwards from there to say what it would look like if that were a blanket wage for Michigan. The fact is that employer wages have not kept up with the cost of living if you believe that humans are entitled to be able to live inside of a structure, have clean water to drink, and access to a basic public education, then we haven't kept up. So I think we should be looking, instead of obsessing over what the number is, we should be looking at what is a ratio of affordability. And if we're going to maintain minimum wage standards at all, then we should do it with a straight face and say that wages should be fixed to the cost of living and opportunities to at least live a rudimentary, safe and healthy lifestyle.
Scotty, let me ask you this. I mean, you've got some PhDs that don't make $15 an hour. I mean, your thoughts is when you hear this whole fight for 15, give us 15. I mean, is that relevant, or are we literally giving people something that they don't deserve? Your thoughts?
Actually, these days, I would say that there aren't many people who don't make at least $15 an hour. I know plenty of people who are, for instance, work in grocery stores and in fast food restaurants that do make $15 an hour. It may not be their starting wage, but after a year or so, yes, that's what they'd be getting. So I don't think that's necessarily an unusual wage. In fact, perhaps it should be higher, but it should not be a mandate. That I don't think first of all, if it's not an interstate commerce issue, the federal government has no jurisdiction over it anyway. So a mom and pop shop, any business that is not doing business across state lines or isn't a chain in multiple states really is unconstitutional to make this restriction on them anyway, first of all. Second of all, even if it is constitutional, it doesn't really make any economic sense, because what we're doing now is really just kind of offering a price that's keeping up with the market. Well, if the market's doing it anyway, why do you even want to make this law from a pragmatic point and from a broader economic perspective? If simply raising a wage by force makes people wealthier, why $15? Why not $15,000 or $15 trillion? Think of all the things you could do with $15 trillion.
Let me ask you. Well, first of all, if I had $15 trillion, I'd have probably a Brice Island, and I had a little man that the plane. No. But David, let me ask you this. I mean, literally, some folks, some economists say that this will destroy restaurants and the private industry if we do this. Why do you think they say that?
Because it's a convenient talking point that's been repeated again and again, and people think it's the truth when it's not. I mean, you've seen regional wage hikes in places like Seattle and Minneapolis and New York City. Last I checked, pre-COVID, there were plenty of restaurants in New York City, and the wage was higher than it is from the federal minimum wage. So I think that economies tend to end up reconcile the ability for workers to meet their basic needs through these wage standards. And when they don't meet their basic needs, then you have the problems that we have now, which is we have a mass housing affordability crisis. We have people working full-time, 2, sometimes 3 jobs that are living in their cars. You have, massive homelessness amongst youth in K-12 programs because their parents work 2 or 3 jobs and can't make ends meet. So it's really a question of where the priorities are. So if we can write a blank check every year for the Defense Department on an unauditable budget to be able to do whatever it is that they do with $960 billion a year, but all of a sudden we can't figure out how to provide SNAP payments for people that are struggling to make ends meet and eat, and we can't figure out how to provide a quality public education for folks, then we're basically divesting in the economy that we claim to hold sacrosanct.
Let me ask you guys this. I want to segue because this has been a big topic. We talked about it last week, and we're going to talk about it again today because it's my show, and I can do that. I want to talk about Tulsi Gabbard. Made a quote where she's, this woman should really be a Republican because she's very conservative on some of her talking points. But she says, and I quote, "Big tech controls who gets to have a voice." Now, I'm gonna start with you, Scotty, on this because I've been in Facebook jail 3 times, repeated Facebook, lockdown felon, whatever you say, because I had a voice. Let me ask you this: so when you hear this whole concept that big tech is controlling the voice of the American people, what do you think that means when literally she's saying that this is really directed to anyone who does not subscribe to what the populist discussion is? Your thoughts on this? I mean, is big tech a threat to the American people, let alone conservatives in America?
Yeah, and the key word here is big, and what do we mean by big? In this case, I mean monopolistic. That when there is collusion between, and I'm not even talking about social networks like, the T word or the FB or whatever. I'm not even going to advertise them because I don't want to honor them with that. I'm not even talking about those social networks because you could go from one social network to another. The problem is, and I will advertise this one, when I went over to Parler, what they ended up doing was they took it down. So, and how did they take it down? It's as if it was just as effective, in fact, maybe more effective than a federal mandate banning it. Because what you end up happening is the servers, they can't find a hosting company, a place that has servers, and it gets technical. A lot of people don't know how this stuff works. But behind the scenes, there has to be computers where there's information is someplace and transacting all the information. The companies doing this, you got like mainly Amazon and Google and like maybe 1 or 2 others. And that's all you got. And when they collude to block people, they're completely shut out. So on the one hand, I agree with the right, put quite blatantly, of private institutions to discriminate as long as there is a possibility of competition and choice. That possibility has been removed by this collusion.
Let me ask you this, David. And this was, Rand Paul had made a statement about this a few years ago. Should private companies have the right to discriminate who their users are?
Well, we just had a whole long conversation about whether or not a gay couple could buy a cake from a baker, right? And that framing from especially the right side of the stage was that, that business has the right to do whatever they want and sell to whoever they want to. And now that the coin is flipped, we're getting a completely different response. So I think the bigger question is if we've ceded the right to the public commons to private corporations who give you a quote-unquote free service that requires you to submit to their terms and conditions, which are enforceable under U.S. code, then what does that say about the state of free speech? And if that private entity decides that someone is being malicious or in violation of those terms and conditions, we have, the case study of POTUS 45, which stays in our mind right now. So the former president was, documented and sourced lying over 20,000 times and was spreading known falsehoods to tens of millions of people over social media networks and arguably incited an insurrection to overthrow the government on January 6th. So whether or not they should have pulled the plug on POTUS 45 long before the time that they chose to censor him is an open debate within those corporate structures, because ultimately you do not have free speech rights as we typically agree to them in a corporate setting. The First Amendment protects your rights if the government is suppressing
this. This is true, but here's the issue that I have with this. When we talk about slippery, and I said this, I was actually on Let It Rip last night, and I said this. I said censorship, the beauty of what makes America great, this is really what makes America great, is that censorship means I could say the stupidest stuff in the world, and it's still protected because there's something called freedom of speech. And folks, this is interesting because what it sounds like is happening is it's freedom of speech, but I've got to somewhat agree with what you say. And if I don't agree with what you say, you can't say it. And if I'm a billionaire tech guy, I'm pulling the plug. Scotty, you're up.
Yeah, I think the analogy of, because you brought up the gay wedding cake, actually it's a cake for a gay wedding example, let's say. And let's say, if you have competing bakers, you can always go to another baker and you can always buy another one. If it's like that, then I agree that company should be able to say, you know what, we just, for whatever reasons we have, do not believe in selling wedding cakes to people that who are gay or whatever. But wait, I'm not done making my main point.
Hold on, Scotty, hold on, Scotty, because I'm going to come back to you. Technically, couldn't Jim Crow laws have said the same thing?
Yes. Now let me finish my point. My point is, what we're dealing with now, the analogy would be, if you had a wealthy landowner buy up all the land in town and told businesses, hey, if you serve gay people, if you make anything for them, then I will shut down your business and you are evicted. That is where we are in the digital equivalent of that. So now discrimination becomes ubiquitous instead of a piecemeal thing where you can go, okay, you guys are bigots, I don't like you, I'll just go somewhere where people like me. But now, even if they like you, they can't, because there's somebody who's taken control, a cartel of companies have taken control and have completely blocked people out.
Right. So what's all
and that would be like more like outright Jim Crow laws, where they'd say like, well, the business cannot allow black people to sit in the front dining room, where they are prohibited from doing it.
So if what's old is new again, Teddy Roosevelt, riding against the Gilded Age. So here we've, in theory, ceded the public square to private interests who monetize and manipulate. So there's plenty of data out there about what Facebook has done over the years to manipulate their algorithms to create problems. And you've seen demonstrations of governments being overthrown in other parts of the country based on misinformation that is spread through these mediums. So if we're to take back the public square, what does it look like having legislators in Congress who don't even know what these services are, let alone how they function or work, to pass legislation to say that these large social media companies need to be broken up, or you need to have, bring back the baby bells, as would have been back in the day, where you need regional infrastructure to support server farms, which is an arguable national security interest, to diversify the holdings and locations of massive amounts of data that are collected by companies on these servers.
Let me ask you guys this. I mean, this is interesting. Folks, I want to hear from you. 313-355-6018. This is The Brice is Right. I want to ask you guys this. Can we simply trust the media? David, I'll let you start, and Scott, back me up. I mean, it seems like there's no money in telling the truth.
So what is the media anymore? The media seems to be anybody who has a platform, because that's a part of the disinformation challenge. Is if you're living in your own bubble and you only get your information from the places that you already agree with, then you're not really living in a media landscape. I mean, the media can go back to the Spanish-American War and the trumped-up challenges around, the challenges with the Maine and Cuba. There's been plenty of examples of media manipulation over the years, but at the same time, there's also no agreement anymore on what truth is. The previous administration, made a very strong case for alt facts being reality, which is not and ever been correct.
Hold on, folks. We're going to come back with Scotty Bowman. We're going to take a quick break. Got to pay the bills, as they say. As we say, real news, real people, straight to the point. This is The Brice is Right. Take us out, Cameron. We'll be right back. We are back, folks. So, Scotty, let's get back into it. So, we're talking about the media. Can we trust the media?
Well, we are the media right now. We're sitting here at microphones. We're broadcasting in one platform or another where people can hear our points of view. But then again, there's a matter of size and degree, and I guess that word big comes in again. And when is big a problem? It's when it becomes monopolistic. And by the way, I just wanted to point out that I've heard some things said here today that, in my opinion, weren't true, coming from right over here. One of my colleagues here.
Fake news. Tell the truth.
But you know what? I agree with his right to say it. And if I had thought it was important enough to dispute something I heard, I could make that point and I can dispute it. And that's where truth comes from. There has never been a consensus on the truth. Let's put that out there. What has happened, though, is because of the way technology developed, there were a few big networks, because it was expensive to be able to broadcast and reach it, or a few people who could print lots of paper. There were a few people in control of the means of getting the information out. And they started seeing their power, as they saw it, the control of information that they were curating, being taken away by the decentralization of news, the decentralization of media. And they, I think, are really those people, when I say those people, I mean like MSNBC, for instance, even Fox to some degree, CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, the UPI, AP, them. That's what I mean by they. What I see happening here is they, in a way, I think, are quietly celebrating the fact that now there is a new central curator controlling that information through the big tech companies that own the servers and all that.
Scotty, this is scary. Gentlemen, this is scary because this is the first time where now, I think I read there were 6 multi-corporations that own literally 80 stations across the U.S. Folks, big government is coming for you. That's right. They're coming for you, and they're going to try to tell you how to live your life. But we can stop it and just find out here on The Brice is Right. So let me ask you. When we talk about, David, the media and the press, do they have a responsibility not just to appease their shareholders, but to make money themselves? Isn't sensationalism what drives the media?
Well, and sensationalism has been part of the decline in public ability to have reasonable conversations in a lot of ways. So I got to give a plug for some local efforts in media here. So the Documenters program at documenters.org was created in Chicago and has spread to cities around the country, including Detroit. And the folks at WDET, the NPR station here in the city, and Citizen Detroit have been training hundreds of people in the city of Detroit and throughout the region to go and provide basic documentation of public meetings. I've been doing this since 2019. I've covered the Great Lakes Water Authority, covered the Detroit Land Bank Authority, and so on and so forth. And Wayne County Commission is a particularly interesting place to show up as a member of the quote-unquote media. So with Documenters training, you go through a couple of courses and you get the basic tools on how to report without your opinion being entered into the process. And then, that goes up to the Detroit Journalism Cooperative and helps inform conversations in newsrooms where they don't have a lot of capacity. So at WDET, the Free Press, Detour Detroit, and other organizations that get that documenters intel, and it spins off into reporting and stories. So as I've been live tweeting some events, the local media outlet in that area that's interested in that thing has picked up, some of the things that are happening in real time at the commission.
Gentlemen, I want to fast track real quick because before we got a couple more minutes, I want to go into this topic because it is personal to me as a former Washingtonian, graduate of Howard University, best HBCU in the land. This has been a debate for probably 30 to 40 years, if not further. The great debate I want to talk about, should D.C. become a state? Scotty, I'm going to come to you. You're shaking your head. Talk to me. Should our nation's capital, the name named after the man that started us all, supposedly, should D.C. become the 51st state of the Union? Your thoughts?
No, and the reason is the only reason Washington, D.C. exists to begin with is it was set up when they wrote the Constitution to structure our current federal system to have a neutral location for the federal government to be based that was not part of any state. So it could be independent of the states and act separately. That there would be a place that people wouldn't feel like one state had an advantage over the others. So they literally took pieces of states like Maryland and Virginia to create this place, and it was like no one really complained because I think it was on a swamp.
It is a swamp.
They literally did drain the swamp.
They did drain the swamp
to build the seat of government. So that's the reason. And if people, and I do feel for people who are being disenfranchised with their vote, and what I'm willing to say is if there was some kind of agreement made by the states that D.C. is bordering here to let a portion of D.C. be part of their population for voting purposes in the federal elections, I would support that. And so you could count them toward their congressional census count or something like that.
David, let me ask you this. There's the big debate of no representation or taxation without representation in D.C. Let me ask you, do you believe that it's time that Puerto Rico and D.C. both became states in the Union?
Well, the referendum in D.C. in 2016, I think, was over 80% of the population of D.C. voted in support of becoming a state. You have over 700,000 people living in D.C., which is more than Vermont or Wyoming. So
Detroit.
It has more population than two states that have seats at the table. The proposal for D.C. statehood includes that 2 of the 12 square miles be dedicated as a federal protectorate. So addressing some of Mr. Bowman's concerns as far as, that this was a place that was supposed to be neutral, I think that is built into the equation that's being requested. And, ultimately, do Americans who are not incarcerated, because the Constitution carves out a challenge for incarcerated folks, do these 700,000 Americans deserve the full rights and responsibilities of citizenship? And thus, do they deserve representation in the Congress and in the House and the Senate? And I think the answer is yes. The D.C. license plate, says taxation without representation. I think the challenge of going back to the founders for how they carved up an area of the swamp between several states to figure out where the neutral place would be has essentially been reconciled by the fact that you have one of the highest per capita tax rates, if it were a state, of any place in the country. And you have the least amount of voice in how those taxes are used in the U.S. Congress. So ultimately, I think statehood makes a lot of sense, and I believe it will get done within the next 150 days or so.
Scotty, let me ask you this. How political is this issue? Because it seems like, there's something deeper than just, we want to give people representation with taxation. It seems like there's a much deeper plot that the Democrats are looking at, not only just that, but Puerto Rico and other states, or other territories that some have even considered for statehood. Your thoughts?
Well, as far as D.C. goes, and actually, any of them, you get 2 senators in the deal automatically by being a state. And that again, with D.C., I believe in giving the people, counting them as voters in one of the adjacent states and making that kind of arrangement so they still get a vote. without, throwing in more senators. Because, yeah, there's obviously a desire that, gee, if we could somehow generate more electoral votes that would automatically go to us, that we could lock in our power a lot better. As far as other places, though, like Puerto Rico is a territory, they're held without really any particular consent. And I mean, that really, their fate should be up to the residents of that territory. And if they want independence, they should be allowed independence. If they want to be a state, I think we should go ahead and admit them into the union. And I think it's total. Or if they want to stay where they are, that's fine. Another thing you brought up about taxation, the other alternative for D.C. is we're going to make it a neutral zone. Then maybe we shouldn't tax people who live in D.C. And then in states, like, you can either choose to vote and move into a state, or if you want to live in D.C., well, you don't pay any taxes.
Let me ask you this, David. Can if D.C. was to allow a clause which said if you are a resident of the district, you won't be taxed, is that reality?
I mean, it could be if it were legislated appropriately. I think it would be pretty exceptional, and you would see property values go through the ceiling, and it would become, instead of the first majority African American state, which is what would happen if it became a state, it would become the first protected, plutocrat a la carte zone in the United States, where you would have a free-for-all, like was proposed for Belle Isle several years ago. Where there was a crazy proposal that we'd like to separate Belle Isle from Michigan and allow it to become, future city and all this sort of crazy stuff. No, thank you. But in the case of DC, I think time has come. The people in DC are ready for statehood. There's a reasonable plan on the table to ensure the arm's length governance of federal property in the process. And ultimately, I think U.S. citizens should have the full right of responsibilities granted to them by the Constitution.
All right, folks, we're going to get into something real hot and juicy. We're going to shut off. We got about 15 minutes more left. I want to get into this topic, which came up last night, but it's been a national story. The story is about Congresswoman from the great state of Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who some have said, she's got some beliefs that some folks don't quite believe are accurate. This person said that 9/11 was a conspiracy, and some other things, which I don't feel comfortable about going on the air, but that's okay because this is the Brice is Right. We talk about this kind of stuff. Scotty, let me ask you this. I mean, some have said that they refuse to purge their party because this is freedom of speech. Your thoughts on this? I mean, does she represent the GOP in some sense, or is she one factor of a much greater party? Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's actually the establishment trying to really impose one version, one narrative of how the world is on the general population. And the fact of the matter is, it isn't a matter of whether or not you believe in conspiracies. It's whose conspiracy theory do you believe? I mean, is everyone going to say 9/11, the attacks were not a conspiracy? I mean, last I read, the 9/11 Commission, which, may definitely have been short on really going in depth and left a lot of questions unanswered, in my opinion. They have a conspiracy theory, and their conspiracy theory involves some people from Al-Qaeda getting together and organizing to hijack these planes. Okay, that's their conspiracy theory. There are wherever greed and two people are gathered, there is a conspiracy. And it's just a matter then of which conspiracy theory do you believe, not a matter of if there are conspiracies. So first of all, the derogatory language of everyone who believes in a conspiracy theory bad is duplicitous and disingenuous, because people who are saying that themselves are probably part of a conspiracy and believe in conspiracies. I mean, the government is a conspiracy. Federal Reserve System is a conspiracy. The Council on Foreign Relations that, what's his name? On MSNBC, Brian Williams belongs to. Okay, he's always knocking conspiracy theorists, and he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. That's a conspiracy. So the notion that conspiracy theories are a derogatory thing is silly. Second of all, about this lady, yes, she has said some things that are downright offensive. Or at least I haven't heard her say it, but people claim she has.
But isn't that freedom of speech?
But people elected her, And the people who elected her apparently may like things that are downright offensive to me over here in Michigan. She doesn't represent me. She represents them, and it's up to them to throw her out in the next election or recall her.
And I'm glad you said that. David, let me ask you this. I mean, when you hear, because here's my issue. Whether you like what she says or not, whether you have issues with her stance, she is an elected official, which means certain voters thought she was smart enough to represent them. Your thoughts on this? I mean, when you see folks on the Republican Party like Mitch McConnell that says, you know, she doesn't speak for us. I mean, do you agree? I mean, where do you think this happens? I mean, we've had crazies and loonies on the left and on the right. Do you see this as, should she be censored? Your thoughts?
So the House of Representatives is the people's house. And you have the widest diversity of viewpoints by design in the House of Representatives. And while I don't agree with almost anything I've heard her say, there is her right to be there. Now, whether or not that was a free and fair election is another question, because if it was gerrymandered into existence and you've already predetermined the outcome of general elections from the district, then, you know, that's another question altogether. Had she not called for the assassination of the Speaker of the House and had an awful lot of really borderline, incendiary, violent comments, then I think she probably would have been allowed to coast. But when you call for the death of the third-ranking individual in the U.S. government, and that individual happens to be in charge of your ability to get
Your
things done
assignments. in
chamber, then the chamber rules are established that this is within the purview of the majority party, and they're going to do what they're going to do, just like the Republicans shut the door on hundreds of Obama judge appointees, and Merrick Garland hasn't gotten a hearing in the Senate for justice.
Let me ask you this, Scotty. You know, this is interesting because David just brought up gerrymandering. Does the system need to be changed where it appears that you either have to be very, very, very Republican or very, very, very Democrat just to win a seat? It almost seems like common sense and compromise have completely went out the window. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, I personally thought, like with the Michigan government, for instance, that the way we should have structured it is that if I were to like start it over, if I had this magic wand or lots of millions of dollars to, you know, change the state constitution, I think the counties, we should have two houses still. The county should be represented in one house, and then the house of the other house should be proportional representation without any district lines at all. And so that way, if you want a regional representative, you got them with your county thing. That doesn't really fit the population, but that's okay. Nothing's going to get passed without the popularly elected proportional representation in the other house. And so you have kind of two levels. You have people in all these regions, the majority of these regions must agree. And then also the majority of the people, or the people representing the majority of the people, must also agree. So you got like two levels of checks and balances.
Why, Scotty, let me ask you this, and David, I want you to jump in on this. Why do we still need political parties in 2021? I mean, I've literally been on the streets and I've talked to people and I said, do you know what so-and-so stands for? No, but he's a Republican.
So Scotty,
or no, but he's a Democrat. I mean, should we get, and David, I ask you this, should we completely get rid of political labels?
I don't know that is within human nature, but I think Scotty made some good points about the proportional representation question. And actually, in 2026, the Michigan Constitution asks the question by mandate that, you know, should we hold the state constitutional convention? So there's an opportunity coming up without having to spend the kind of money that Mr. Bowman was just talking about to rewrite the rules of engagement in the state of Michigan. And, you know, everything that we have in Michigan is the product of Democrats and Republicans' whims for the last over a century. No other party has served, and an independent hasn't served in Michigan legislature since the 1890s. You had a couple of minor party candidates, socialists and communists, that got in the teens, but there has been, by and large, no representation for anyone other than Democrats and Republicans. And about 45% of the state electorate identifies as independent. So with the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, you have 13 humans that have been chosen out of a lottery of applicants to redraw districts in Michigan. So you have an opportunity to step forward with a different way of doing things starting in the 2022 elections. And then by 2026, if we chose to have a constitutional convention in this state to redraw the rules of engagement for how we want to do business in the 21st century, we could, in effect, say that Democrats and Republicans do not get the exclusive voice for how things are managed in this state, that we could have a system of proportional representation that would allow for libertarians, Greens, Natural Law Party, independents to have a voice through that proportional structure, which would completely upend the way we do business in this state. Because really the tribal warfare system that we have for managing, this is the only example where I can imagine that you can have no more than 4 years of experience to have operational budget decision-making authority over a $60 billion budget.
All right, hold on. I want to wrap it up because we got a couple more minutes left. You mentioned 2022. Final thoughts. 2022, the governor's race. Does the governor lose in 2022 if she cannot get this COVID and pretty much the small businesses in a better predicament than what they're in right now? Yes or no? Does she win?
It depends on who's running against her.
Okay. Does she win?
I say the probability is that she wins.
Now, you real quick. You mentioned who runs against her. Who are the top three candidates on the right that could beat the Big Gretch? Your thoughts?
Well, personally, I don't vote right or left. I vote libertarian. But I really don't know right now. I think one person that looks like he might, because he's already been taken around a bit, is Paul Mitchell. And he's a person who stood up a lot against other overreaches by the state government, and I think he might be someone who's got a chance.
All right.
You know, I was listening to all those John James commercials and heard Tim Allen's voice, and I wondered, is Tim Allen really a good representation of the Pure Michigan campaign?
Hey, man, that's tool time, man. That's tool time.
Just saying,
right.
You know, the partisanship is silly. I
hear you. Folks, I want to thank my two guests, Scotty Bowman and David Palmer, what do you call yourself, David? The governance advocate, honest government advocate, and then Scotty Bowman, the professor emeritus at Macomb County College.
Actually, not emeritus. I still work there at Macomb Community College and Wayne County Community College District, and I'm on the Community Advisory Council for District 4 in Detroit.
There you go, folks. You heard it here. This is the Brice is Right. We're going to close out, as they say, Salitude, real news, real people, straight to the point. I am Brandon Brice, the People's Champ, and you have heard it today. We close out. Cameron, take us out till next week.